Welcome to Papas in Poetry. This is a brief analysis lesson so that you'll be able to write about literature during this unit. And not everyone will be able to enjoy poetry as a part of their ongoing college career. So I hope that you can take this as a special moment where you can look at a poem and you can be creative, but you also have limits designed by the author. And so when we're analyzing, we can still be creative. We can come up with our own ideas about what is being said, but we need to try and figure out what exactly is being done by the author. So as we go through these poems, we're going to have 3 poems here. They all relate to the same general topic. I want you to be thinking about what each poem says about a father figure. So the 2 poems that we're going to analyze together are Robert Hayden's Those Winter Sundays and Theodore Roethke's My Papa's Waltz. And these 2 poems are found in many, many anthologies. And so obviously they've been identified as excellent poems that get a message across using poetic devices in a masterful way. And I mean, you can disagree that they are classics. You can disagree that they are interesting poems, but the general consensus is that these are poems worth reading. So let's give them a shot. And we're going to be reading these poems to understand how poets use language to create meaning. And because poems are compressed language, every word counts. Now, in this PowerPoint, you're going to have questions that are raised, and I'm not always going to answer them, but I'm, recording these audio segments so that you'll have some kind of guide, and you won't just be reading the PowerPoint by yourself. You should answer these questions in your head, but if you don't answer every one or if you don't write anything down, that's totally fine. But at the end, you do have an assignment that will be posted to your Flipcast blog for Unit 3. And, the main thing is that you want to get a general sense of what each poem means. And that's a literary sense. So you obviously have to have the tools of literature at your disposal. And so that means that you need to remember what figurative language is and how poems are made with meter and a specific rhythm that creates an effect. So again, the culmination of this PowerPoint is that you will write a response that's 3 to 5 paragraphs. And that's about a page and a half if you double space it and do it the traditional way. But I'm not asking you to do that. You're just going to post it as a comment or a reply to the thread on the Flipcast blog. What we're going to be doing as we look at these poems, we're going to be conducting a close reading. Whenever you do a close reading, you're using something called formalism or new criticism. And it means that you're going to look at the poem as a work of art, and you're not going to think so much about what the author had going on in his or her life. You just want to look at how the work of art is functioning. And so we're going to be looking at the content of these poems, and we're going to look at poetic devices and see how the poetic devices and the content work together to create meaning. And again, this is called new criticism, and so this is a new critical approach, and it's also called close reading. And we're going to look at these 2 poems in depth. If you're not familiar with new criticism, I recommend that you click on the link that's posted on the slide here, and you can also Google new criticism. Some of it will be very, very difficult to follow if you don't have experience with that, but what you should know is that many, many high school classes use new criticism because it's the kind of poetry analysis that people can kind of get a handle on. And so that's the format that we're using. So to start us off, we need to have guiding questions, questions that are leading us through these poems. And these are formalist questions. Again, formalism, new criticism, close reading. Those three things go together. And I'll just say this. Back when this style of poetry reading was established, the most famous book using this kind of criticism, using this kind of analysis, it was called A Well-Wrought Urn. An urn is like a Greek vase. And so if it's well wrought, that means it's well designed. And it really, sometimes when you do this kind of analysis, it's almost like you're a scientist of poetry and you're analyzing this work of art and you're admiring the beauty. So the first question is, how do Robert Hayden and Theodore Roethke incorporate poetic devices to convey meaning in Those Winter Sundays in My Papa's Waltz? So how do they do this? Poetic devices, again, figurative language. You have sound devices like assonance and consonants. You have sometimes allusions can be used, like Shakespeare used allusions to Greek mythology, and an allusion means you're making a reference to something outside of the poem. So there are all kinds of poetic devices that we can talk about. And I will include a link on this slide as well with some more poetic devices. The second question is, how does the form of each poem relate to its content? So these are our objectives here. And the first one is to define and understand in context common poetic devices such as alliteration, consonance, and repetition. Number 2, we need to discuss poetic meter and rhythm and its relationship to theme. Number 3, compare and contrast poems, themes via active class discussion. Okay, now we are going to do our discussion through the discussion board, but hopefully you'll be able to communicate with others what you're thinking and have a chance to hear what other people think. And finally, you need to provide a well-supported written analysis of the relationship between a poem's form and its content. So, how a poem looks is important, but also how a poem sounds, what it sounds like, that's important. All these things point toward meaning. Okay, take some time now and read Those Winter Sundays. The link is available for you, and you can also Google it if you can't get to the link. And then listen to Roethke read his own poem, My Papa's Waltz. And again, the link is given for you. So please take some time now and enjoy those two poems. So our first question, after you've read Those Winter Sundays, is, what is this poem about? Hopefully this is one that you can relate to. You've experienced the winter and getting up on a winter morning, but most likely your experience is somewhat different from the speakers. Now remember, whenever we talk about a poem, we need to use the word speaker. You don't say narrator, you don't say author or poet. It's the speaker. And this can be a created voice. And so that's something that you'll need to do when you analyze. Talk about the speaker of the poem. The speaker is talking about his father. And yes, of course, we can think about the author. And if you clicked on the link for the poem, you had a chance to listen to the author reading his own poem. And he links himself to the poem. But let's just take a step back. That's what the new critics are supposed to do, the formalists or the close readers. We're supposed to take a step back and analyze as scientists. And so I want you to be thinking about this as you look at the other bullets here. what is the relationship between the Father and the Son, and what do these words mean? Offices, austere. Why do they appear in that last part of the poem? By the way, we talk about stanzas of a poem and lines, and you want to refer to line numbers, and so you'll have to number them. You'll have to actually figure out what number each line is. And the last question is, do these words seem appropriate to the poem? Do these words fit? And obviously they've been chosen carefully. So take some time, look up those words in the dictionary, and make your own conclusions. Just one quick word. In poems, you want to look for irony. You want to look for things that are not expected. And in those winter Sundays, I especially like that first line where it says that, he rises too early on Sundays. So even on Sundays, he's rising early to warm the house. And I guess I just wanted to insert that the son's reaction is very typical. I know it was for me. And the question is it what you expected? Now, this second poem, My Papa's Waltz, it's also, it's got an ironic edge to it. And at first glance, this seems like a gentle poem where a boy gets to dance with his father. But there's much more to it. So again, what's the poem about? Try to paraphrase it, put it into your own words. There are many sites that you can go to online to get more analysis, Shmoop and places like that, SparkNotes. But I would say resist that and come up with your own ideas first. And again, there's a relationship between the poem's speaker and the father here too. And then you want to compare the relationship between this father and son and the father and son in the other poem. The third poem that we're going to look at, I'm just going to kind of have a spoiler alert here. The third poem is a female speaker and has a very different relationship with her father. And I included it, even though it's a little bit harsh, and I apologize a little bit for the language, but I think that it's important to see the diversity that fathers and sons and fathers and daughters and mothers and sons and mothers and daughters all have varying relationships, and we can't just put it in a box. So your job here is to point out some specific details from those winter Sundays that lead you to an assessment about the poem's meaning. You want to look for sounds. You can also look for images. I want to make sure that you're looking for images. Images are concrete word pictures. And so sometimes a verb is a very vivid image. If you say cracked, right away, I have a picture of a jagged line, and maybe I have a picture of bricks that have grown old, or a roof that is leaking. I mean, there are all kinds of associations that I might have with that word cracked. Maybe it's the crust of the earth. But don't go too far without having some sort of evidence in the poem itself guiding you to understand what that image really is trying to get at. So look at verbs, look at nouns. Yes, adjectives are helpful, but I would say poems rely on verbs and nouns and the relationships between those words. The next thing is that you want to find details in the description that help to clarify the relationship between father and son. So here's maybe the other side of the coin, some answers for you, some examples. And these aren't the only ones, so I don't want you to think that your ideas weren't good ideas. So in those winter Sundays, just in the first stanza alone, you have blue, black, cold. Now you might say, oh, that's an adjective, but I mean it's a very unique adjective, blue-black. And cracked hands that ached. Banked fires blaze. So you've got lots of sounds that are repeated. I hope you can see the B's or hear the B's being repeated, and also the C's. And what does this make you think of when you have k, crack, and cold, and black, and blaze? These are the sounds of the fire. So, words that we need to know. Alliteration is when you have consonant sounds at the beginnings of words that are repeated. The same sound is repeated. And so in these lines, in these words here, you have clothes and you have cold. You also have consonants. Consonants is when you have those same consonant sounds not at the beginnings of words. So black, the k sound is at the end of the word black. And cracked, it's at the beginning, but it's also in the middle. Ached, it's after that first vowel sound. So, when you have that internal consonant sound that is repeated, that's consonants. And if you have vowel sounds that are repeated, it's called assonance. And alliteration, again, is when consonants are at the beginnings of the words. So here's the question. Here's the question that they are getting at. How do these hard C's and K sounds, the consonants, how do they contribute to the mood of this opening stanza? This fire, it seems like it should be warm, but it's also kind of spitting at us. What effect does this example of consonants have on the speaker's characterization of his father? Why or how? You can have more than one conclusion here. But you can't deny that there is this sense that the son doesn't appreciate his father, at least not at the time when this event was happening. Why do you think no one ever thanked him? Well, there's some hints. There's some hints about why no one ever thanked him. There's a sense that maybe he is austere in his love. And that can be a very deep love, but it can also be a cold love. And finally, when you hear this stanza, what do these sounds inherently sound like? What do these sounds make you think of? And I think we've already answered that, but hopefully that'll bring you back to how sound is creating or pointing to meaning. Okay, so after going through the first stanza on your own and talking about the consonants and the alliteration, now identify consonants and assonants, which is vowel sounds that are repeated in the rest of those winter Sundays. Think about what Haydn might mean when he writes, fearing the chronic angers of the house. That is the hint that I was referring to earlier. Is this poem written in a particular form? I'll tell you right now, it's not a sonnet. A sonnet is probably the most famous kind of poem in the English language, but it's not everybody's cup of tea. It's 14 lines and has a very set rhyme scheme, and Shakespeare wrote lots of sonnets. But this one, I'll tell you, it's not a sonnet. But does it have a rhyme scheme? Does it have end words that rhyme in a certain pattern? So what you do is you give each line, each rhyme, a letter. And so sometimes we say A, B is a rhyme scheme, or A, B, C, B. That's a lot of hymns that you sing in church or praise songs have a rhyme scheme, and you can kind of pay attention to how it alternates. And now I will read this poem, even though it's a female speaker. You do not do any more, black shoe, in which I have lived like a foot for 30 years, poor and white, barely daring to breathe or eschew. Daddy, I have had to kill you. You died before I had time. Marble heavy, a bag full of God. Ghastly statue with one gray toe, big as a Frisco seal. and ahead in the freakish Atlantic where it pours bean green over blue in the waters of beautiful Nauset. I used to pray to recover you. Ach du. In the German tongue, in the Polish town, scraped flat by the roller of wars, 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 but the name of the town is common, my Polak friend. My Polak friend says there are a dozen or two, so I never could tell where you put your foot, your root. I never could talk to you. The tongue stuck in my jaw. It stuck in a barbed wire snare. Ich. I could hardly speak. I thought every German was you, and the language obscene, an engine chuffing me off like a Jew to Dachau, Auschwitz, Belsen. I began to talk like a Jew. I think I may well be a Jew. The snows of the Tyrol, the clear beer of Vienna are not very pure or true with my gypsy ancestress and my weird luck in my tarot pack. I may be a bit of a Jew. I have always been scared of you with your Luftwaffe, your gobbledygoo, and your neat mustache and your Aryan eye, bright blue, Panzerman, oh you, not God, but a swastika so black no sky could squeal through. Every woman adores a fascist, the boot in the face, the brute heart of a brute like you. You stand at the blackboard, Daddy, in a picture I have of you, a cleft in your chin instead of your foot, but no less a devil for that. No, not any less the black man who bit my pretty red heart in two. I was 10 when they buried you. At 20, I tried to die and get back to you. I thought even the bones would do. But they pulled me out of the sack, and they stuck me together with glue. And then I knew what to do. I made a model of you, a man in black with a Mein Kampf look, and a love of the rack and the screw, and I said, I do. So, Daddy, I'm finally through. The black telephone's off at the root. The voices just can't worm through. If I've killed one man, I've killed two. The vampire who said he was you and drank my blood for a year. 7 years, if you want to know. Daddy, you can lie back now. There's a stake in your fat black heart. And the villagers never liked you. They are dancing and stamping on you. They always knew it was you. Daddy, you bastard, I'm through. Now, I hope you haven't totally tuned me out. Obviously, it was a difficult poem, and it's one that I remember from my high school days when my teacher had us read it, and it was a hard one to stomach, especially when you hear kind of the latent racism of our world. And again, I'll say I don't think that was the intention of the speaker or the poet to be racist, but it's a fact of our world. At the same time, I think the issue is about a father and a daughter. And so I hope that gives you plenty to work with as you're trying to do your own response. And so you get to choose one of the pop-up poems, write 3 to 5 paragraphs discussing the language used in the poem and how it creates some meaning. You quote phrases and lines from the poem using MLA format, okay? And the MLA format should use double quotation marks, obviously. And then after those quotation marks, you have a parenthetical reference, which is the line number. And, I hope that you understand that in choosing these 3 poems, we're not trying to shape your own relationships in negative ways. And I hope that we can all be very grateful for what the Lord has given us in our lives. That He's given us parents, but we realize that those relationships are not always in harmony. And I hope that you'll have some fun in trying to understand a poem, any of these three poems. And let me know if you have any questions. Take care.